Okay, how do you like this unceremonious opening here? I kind of like it myself. It just turns out that, we have Murphy's Law working against us right now on a lot of different things. By the way, remember, oh yeah, I hope this isn't making a lot of noise for the sound guy. I wore my 9/11 shirt to remind people that that's what started this whole phase of imperialism off again. But before we get into some of the more heavy topics, let's get into another heavy topic in a way. Remember Lloyd Marbett, the nuclear activist? He's now a climate change activist, and he was just on the A Growing Concern show last night. That would be on the, the 20th, I guess, Friday the 20th. And try to catch the reruns if you can. It was a great show. He filled up, he filled in the gaps on his diabetes and his his prostate cancer and so on. It turns out that he was a victim of Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. But he was passing out, let's see if you can see that. It says, catastrophic climate change is just another way to burn in hell. Okay, that's you can get these bumper stickers from the Conservancy at s07e38. That's CNSRVNCY at s07e38.com. Anyway, you'll probably won't have a problem finding that. Well, we're going to get right on into there. A couple of things happened since the last show. One of the things, of course, was yesterday when Obama took executive action. Where do they get executive action? It means I act like a king, and that isn't supposed to be allowed. There's talk about how he was maneuvered into it, tricked into it, if you will, by the Republicans. But we can talk about that later. And I'm going to surprise everybody on this live call-in show. I'm actually going to open up the phone lines a little bit later, so get ready for that. In the meantime, one of the more important things is, Obama has had a chance to make a favorable legacy for his administration by, banning torture. But he chose not to. He decided to go against his promise, his election campaign promise, to get rid of torture, and he didn't. We've got a roll in here from the Real News Network based in Boston. This is Michael Ratner, who's a constitutional law expert, professor, and he's going to talk about the extension of the Bush torture regime. So we'll be back in about 14 minutes.
Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Anton Warrenchuk in Baltimore. We're joined now by Michael Ratner. He's the president emeritus of the Center for Constitutional Rights in New York, and he's also a board member of the Real News Network. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
It's good to be with you, Anton, and the Real News.
So, Michael, what do you have for us this week?
Well, this week there were the hearings in Geneva on the question of whether the U.S., the United States, was in compliance with the Convention Against Torture. That's a treaty the United States signed a number of years ago, has a number of provisions, and periodically, really every 4 years, the U.S. is called before the committee in Geneva to see whether it's complied with that Convention Against Torture. That convention prohibits torture. It prohibits cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, which is a lesser form of torture. It requires that torturers be brought to justice, investigated, and prosecuted if there's evidence, and other provisions. And the big question, of course, in this one is, now that the Obama administration is in office, how will it reinterpret, or how will it really talk about its compliance with the Convention Against Torture after the convention was completely shredded by the Bush administration? Just completely. As we know, there were black sites, there was torture, there was waterboarding. The Obama administration has left the door wide open for torture to occur again, and has failed to comply with the Convention Against Torture. Those hearings are completed, and I can just highlight a few of the key points. One of them, and an important one, is whether the treaty prohibits cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, which, as I said, is a lesser form of torture, although sometimes, as the Bush administration did, they tried to claim that what they were doing, waterboarding, only fit into that lesser form. In fact, of course, it was the higher form. But the key first question is whether that treaty prohibits cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment overseas. The Bush administration said it did not, and that's what allowed it to get away, in its view, with waterboarding, everything it did in prisons around the world, in Guantanamo, et cetera, claiming that it's not torture, which they agreed was prohibited overseas, but it's this lesser form, which they said was not. The Bush, the administration, Obama administration, 2 weeks ago started to come out publicly with what their view was going to be on whether the treaty barred cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment overseas. I did a piece on that for the Real News 2 weeks ago, in which it was unclear what the administration would do. Well, at the hearing, it came out with that they were splitting the baby in two, essentially. They said cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, in our view, is prohibited in facilities over which the U.S. essentially has complete jurisdiction and control. In other words, a place like Guantanamo or a U.S. flagged ship. But it would not prohibit cruel and inhuman degrading treatment in a prison in Iraq that the U.S. had prisoners, in a prison in Afghanistan, conceivably in black sites, which were the old torture places, et cetera, that were located in other countries. So it does leave open, and the Obama administration did leave open the possibility that they could still carry out cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment in one of these zones where they claim they have less control. Now, they said they wouldn't do that, but the danger, of course, is that they could do that if there's another terrorist attack. The next president could do it, and it certainly sends a message to the rest of the world, and I put this in heavy quotes, the leader of the human rights movement in the world, supposedly, actually makes an exception in the Torture Convention for cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment outside of its own country. So that's flaw number one. Flaws number 2 and 3 came out really most strikingly in the testimony of a man named Murat Kurnaz. Murat Kurnaz was a Guantanamo detainee, was represented by the Center for Constitutional Rights, eventually got out of Guantanamo where he had been tortured. He was put into Guantanamo when he was 19 years old, had been sold for a bounty of $3,000, et cetera, got out eventually, and has tried to continue leading his life, wrote an important book, and he testified about two things, and it was very powerful. One, he said the last hearing that the U.S. faced in Geneva, the committee said they had to close Guantanamo, and the time that happened was in 2006. 8 years ago, they were told the U.S. closed Guantanamo because it's a form of torture, essentially. Even if it's not overt torture in the sense of waterboarding any longer, it's, as Kurnaz says, no charges against people. They have no understanding of when they're going to get out of there. It's physical, yes, because they're in a confined space. They can't have visitors other than their lawyers, but it's mental torture as well, certainly cruel and inhuman and degrading treatment, because they have no way out. 79 of those people have been told they've been cleared for release, have not been released. This is 12 years after the founding of Guantanamo. So a second problem for the U.S. at this hearing on the Convention Against Torture is the continuation of Guantanamo. The third point is that the Torture Convention requires that torturers be prosecuted. The U.S., since the torture scandal broke open in the early 2000s, has not prosecuted a single person for torture. It was approved by Bush, Cheney, down the chain, CIA people, torture throughout this government. And not one person, not a single person has been tortured. And the key, as Kurnaz and others have said, the key to stopping torture in the future, which is why I'm so skeptical of the pious words of the Obama administration, the key is to prosecute torturers. We haven't done it. The U.S. claims they tried it with something called the Durham investigation. That was utter BS. They didn't do it. They never interviewed, as far as we know, any of the key victims who were tortured. That's the third. And the fourth which came up in the last couple of days, is what's called Annex M. Annex M is part of the Army Field Manual. It allows sensory deprivation, it allows sleep deprivation, and it allows solitary confinement. Those three taken together can certainly constitute cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, as well as torture. The Obama administration just flip-flopped around it, saying we require a minimum of 4 hours of sleep. Well, 4 hours sleep day after day is basically cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, if not more. When combined with others, it can be worse. The people on the committee said, why don't you just take Annex M out of that? The administration demurred on it, as they have for a number of years. So we still have in our law an authorization to use cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, if not more. Those are the four key things that came out of this. And I should say, while we're talking about them, because what I talked about 2 weeks ago was the current trial going on regarding Guantanamo and forced feeding. There's a claim made by a number of people at Guantanamo, and the particular client in that case, saying that forced feeding amounts to torture, certainly cruel and inhuman and degrading treatment. There was medical testimony about it. The way it's done amounts to that. It's being done at all amounts to that. There's been no decision on that, but certainly some of the slippage and the holes that you see in this testimony at Geneva by the United States may be a way of protecting itself from a finding that what it's doing at Guantanamo with regard to force feeding is a form of torture. So while we're seeing a lot of people say, oh, what the Obama administration is doing is very good here, they're coming out clearly, it's torture, what the past administration did, it's adhering to international law again, et cetera. In fact, if you look even a little more closely, you see that it's leaving wide holes in the prohibition against torture. And the key one I want to emphasize again is the utter failure of this Obama administration to prosecute a single person for what we saw as rampant torture. You can just imagine, take it back, and I'll close on this, take it back to Pinochet in Chile, to the Argentinian generals. People were outraged that none of them got prosecuted. Ultimately, 10, 20, 30 years later, they have, hopefully, in the United States. Those CIA people, those administration people are not resting easy, because hopefully we will be able to go after them. As a final note on that, the Center for Constitutional Rights and the European Center for Constitutional Rights have a case pending in Spain under universal jurisdiction against the people who tortured at Guantanamo, the U.S. officials. And we just yesterday won a huge victory in that. The judge said he was going ahead with the case against the people who did the torture at Guantanamo, and not the prosecutor, but one of the people in Spain, an official, Attorney General, appealed it to a higher court. The higher court upheld the decision to go forward with that case in Spain. So while the U.S. has been a total failure under the Convention Against Torture, the Spanish government is going ahead, particularly because 4 Spanish nationals were tortured at Guantanamo.
So, Michael, despite all these flaws that you've described and these things that you enumerated that the Obama administration could do to, for example, prosecute torture, there are a lot of commentators who are saying that this at least shows that the Obama administration is more committed to international law than the Bush administration, and that these statements that they've made shows a greater commitment. Would you agree on that point?
The question is words. You know, Obama's known for his speech making, whether it's about closing Guantanamo or drones. And I would say the same thing about this. They're good at words, this administration, but they're not so good at acting on those words. So I call them pious words. And I would say the holes left in our obligations under Convention Against Torture, mainly the failure to prosecute, but the hole on where cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment applies, the failure to close Guantanamo. That's how one should judge the Obama administration and Obama. I don't make my judgments on pious words that I can hang over my bed and look at when I go to sleep. I make them on actual acts and of suffering human beings at Guantanamo and the future of what will happen when the next administration, or even perhaps this one, tries to re-engage in torture again. They have to act. They don't just have to speak.
Okay, and then on a final point, do you think that that the statements that they've made thus far, that their decisions to, I guess, leave some of the options open for using torture, do you think that this is purposeful in that to leave open the possibility of using torture in the future, or to provide legal cover for torture that might be occurring right now?
It's a good question. I mean, I sort of think that we don't know everything that's going on right now. We know about Guantanamo. We don't know the jeopardy of people. Certainly, if they see some room on particularly cruel and inhuman and degrading treatment, they're giving themselves some room to engage in that conduct in these prisons in Afghanistan and Iraq, and perhaps on ships that are flagged under other countries, et cetera. That's certainly a possibility. And I would, whether a strong one or not, I don't know. So it is protecting some of the people, I think, that may be engaged in that conduct today. I also think you probably have huge pressures, and I don't forgive Obama for this. You do have huge pressures from the intelligence agencies, all of whom, at least a number of those leaders, like Brennan, et cetera, should probably be prosecuted for torture, should be prosecuted for torture. And I do think they put huge pressure on the administration, which I think is an administration, in fact, large part run by the intelligence agencies, security agencies, and the military. And I think you're getting these exceptions because they're trying to say, as Cheney said, as others said, don't tie our hands on issues like this. Another attack, and we're going to have to torture again. And I think that is a subtext of what happened in Geneva.
Okay, Michael Ratner, President Emeritus for the Center for Constitutional Rights. Thank you so much for that report.
All right. Yeah. Now you see why I really like the Real News Network, TRNN.com, live from Boston. Well, they're not live. That was recorded, of course. But the analysis is top notch, and you know, they don't get corporate contributions. So, you know, and unlike Democracy Now, they you know, they don't have any grants from the CIA to keep them from talking about 9/11 or other issues like that. Well, now, if you recall, during the Bush administration, every single thing that George Bush did was completely whitewashed by most of the media, but in specific, of course, Fox News. And now we've got, here's an interview. The only reason I get to have this is that I have permission by the interviewer. Otherwise, I think everything that Phil Donahue does is probably copyrighted, too much for me to get on the show. But here's Phil Donahue talking about the mainstream media whitewashing everything Obama does. So go ahead and take it away, if you're ready.
As mainstream media actually helped to deceive the American people into believing that drone strikes are mostly successful in killing militants and resulting in very few civilian casualties. According to several new reports, yes. 2 years ago, President Obama embraced a method of counting civilian casualties of drone strikes. Now, that method essentially allows an adult-age male killed by a drone strike to be counted as a militant, whether he was or not. Not only is the practice deceitful, it's also been adopted by most mainstream media. As Glenn Greenwald points out in The Intercept, quote, most large Western media outlets continue to describe completely unknown victims of U.S. drone strikes as militants, even though they, A, had no idea who those victims were or what they had done, B, were well aware that by that point the term had been redefined by the Obama administration into Alice in Wonderland level nonsense, end quote. So how inaccurate is the reporting on this issue? The Bureau for Investigative Journalism took a look at the numbers coming out of Pakistan, the nation that has received the largest number of U.S. drone strikes of any in the world. Take a look at this. The number of U.S. drone strikes in Pakistan, as it hits 400, research by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism finds that fewer than 4% of the people have been identified by available records as members of al-Qaeda. This calls into question U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry's claim last year that only, quote, confirmed terrorist targets at the highest level were fired at. Former talk show host Phil Donahue was a guest on Tom Hartman's The Big Picture last night. He says that media response to war today echoes the marching orders they took from the Bush administration in the build-up to the Iraq War.
every major metropolitan newspaper in this country supported the invasion of Iraq. Think about that. That just baffles me. I mean, it just stuns. I guess I shouldn't be baffled. I am staggered by the fact, though. Imagine the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Chicago Tribune, the LA Times, pick a Dallas Morning Herald, pick a newspaper. They all got caught up in this politics of fear, and there are millions and millions of Americans in this country who believe to criticize a president when we're running up to a war is irresponsible, unpatriotic, unfair to the troops, unfair to our president. We have to unite behind him, and that's why, and media gets right in line, and corporate media gets right in line. The new media, not unlike the one I'm appearing right now, may be the biggest antidote to this very deleterious nature of what we've come to, with only 5 or 6 companies controlling most of the airwaves.
Well, Donahue went on to point out that not every journalist went along with that corporate-run media filtered message, though.
They had to fight to get their stuff in, because they were saying, wait a minute, where is the evidence, weapons of mass? We don't see. How come, why is all this heavy breathing? And they did great work, but it wound up, if it got in their papers at all, it was buried on page 6 or 7. Corporate media did not want to oppose a president, especially if that corporate media was owned by a defense contractor, which my media, MSNBC at the time, was owned by General Electric, one of the 5 biggest defense contractors in the world. And here's this gray-haired guy on TV, appearing to not respect Donald Rumsfeld. Donald Rumsfeld is one of their biggest customers. Corporate managers of media play golf with the defense establishment people. And so that, and also you couldn't ask why these guys bomb these towers. You couldn't ask that, because that was blaming the victim. Every attempt at scratching your head and wondering was slapped down. And so all the energies conspire to promote war. Norman Solomon has a book, War Made Easy, in which he says if a president wants a war, he can have one.
Donahue goes on to say that those who are the dissenters in America are the true patriots. As mainstream media actually help to deceive the American people into believing that drone strikes are mostly successful in killing militants and resulting in very few civilian casualties.
Yeah, that was the beginning again. But basically, it's a culture, the military-industrial complex. Remember, was it General Stubblebine? Is that his name? I think I got it right. The war is a racket. I think I have it attributed correctly. I might not. But anyway, the point is, war is a racket. And these guys just pretend to be adversaries when they get back into Congress. Like the Republicans and Democrats, enemies? No, not really. They go out just like the media does, golfing and having dinners and all that sort of stuff. Just good buddies. And then they get in front of the camera, and it's time to feed the story to us, and we just lap it up. Just lap it up. Don't even question it. And if you do question it, you're a vicious enemy of the state. Oh, by the way, here, we're going to open it up for phone calls. If you have something to comment on, now's your chance. We haven't done this for a while, even though we claim to be a live call-in show. So here's your chance to get your word out. In the meantime, I've got a little short almost a 4-minute clip here to show you about 5 companies that profit from war.
First billionaire John D. Rockefeller said that if you want to succeed, you should strike out on new paths rather than the paths of accepted success, which is fine, I guess, but sometimes those paths aren't worn for a reason, as Rockefeller himself found out in the lead up to World War II, as we take you on a timeline of immorality, where business operates above geopolitics and conflict. This is the business of war.
It takes a lot of fuel to have a global scuffle, and leading up to World War II, Germany had to import about 85% of its finished petroleum. But luckily, there was one company from America that was quite good at manufacturing gasoline from coal, which Germany did have a lot of. It was Standard Oil, owned by John D. Rockefeller. A report from the US Embassy in Berlin dated 1933 said in 2 years Germany will be manufacturing oil and gas enough out of soft coal for a long war. The Standard Oil of New York is furnishing millions of dollars to help. And that they did. Through Standard Oil's expertise and delivery of that ability, they literally fueled Hitler's army and made World War II possible. Standard Oil weren't the only ones getting in on all the cash flying out of Germany during the war though. Hitler wanted to streamline the process of identifying and selecting Jews for ghettos, labour camps, deportation and eventually execution. But apart from being the worst genocide in human history, there was also a lot of admin. Luckily, IBM's Hollerith punch card system was the perfect tool for the job. But IBM didn't just sell the Nazis the technology and walk away. It was leased for a huge profit and developed over time to match the needs of the Nazis. So remember, the customer is always right. Wink. The Al Yamamah arms deal saw a number of arms sales, primarily from the UK's BAE Systems, to Saudi Arabia, in return for the supply of 600,000 barrels of oil a day to the UK. Whilst many thought it wasn't brilliant to deal with a hardline Saudi regime in the first place, the Serious Fraud Office decided to investigate a supposed £20 million slush fund. Saudi Arabia then threatened to call a second deal off if the investigation wasn't suspended, which it was. The High Court then ruled in 2008 that the SFO had acted unlawfully by dropping the case, and that ministers had buckled under blatant threats from Saudi Arabia. But the House of Lords overturned that High Court ruling, saying that was unlawful. So that's alright then. Private militias are big business. America in particular seems to like them. And the most famous is probably Blackwater, now known as Academy. Eric Prince, the billionaire founder of the company, was asked by Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan of Abu Dhabi to build an 800-strong private battalion for $529 million. Eric Prince did an interview in an Emirati newspaper praising the pro-business climate of the UAE. He also did an interview where he was quoted as saying, "We are not mercenaries, but they do get paid to fight in wars." Whilst these sorts of deals so often happen behind closed doors, now they just happen in plain sight. In July this year, the somewhat dubious Qatari regime signed an $11 billion deal to buy US Raytheon-built Patriot missiles, with US Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel on hand to shake hands with Qatar's Defense Minister.
So thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed what you saw, click like and subscribe, and tell us in the comments below what you'd like us to cover in the future. Rockefeller said that if you want to succeed, you should strike out on...
We have a problem with our... we got to uncheck that box in the VLC player that lets it stop on the end instead of keeping it going. Now, earlier in just the last video, remember the phone lines are open right now. Oops, right here. There you go. But Donahue was talking about the corporate involvement, and I have an interesting chart to show you. We have to iris it down a little bit, I guess. But this, go ahead and pull out until you see most of the chart. Yeah, see the whole chart. See, this is 10 corporations that control every single thing you buy. So everything you buy, there's by 10 corporations here. Yeah, it's kind of dark. There, I can tip it down so you can see it better that way. But anyway, if you want to see that, and this one's a really good one. Remember about the Bilderbergs? They first claimed, no, there's no such group as the Bilderbergers. And that story about them meeting in Bilderberg Hotel is just, folklore. Well, they actually took the time to write down, change the iris a little bit. You can't really see. Go ahead and zoom in on this one. in the center so people can see it. And go ahead and switch to it when he gets it. Go ahead, switch to it. Hello, control room. Well, anyway, the point is, each one of those is a Bilderberg member, and then take a look here. These are the corporations that they control, with lines going to all of them. I can move this around, and you see there. It's kind of hard to see, but if you'd like to see it yourself, then all you have to do is go to the internet, and it's businessinsider.com, and that's where I got those. So, well, it doesn't look like we have any calls. So what we're going to do, I didn't tell the guys, but to the director there, if you do a Control Q to close the player on my laptop in front of you, and then play the one about Israel on the very top list. This is something that's just come out in the news lately. We've known for a long time. What? He's saying okay? Oh, he's ready. Oh, we do have a phone call. Okay, that's what he was saying. I was waiting for the lights to blink. Okay, we'll go ahead and take a phone call. Go ahead, caller. Here, I'll move over here so people can see the phone number. I don't hear anything out here.
Hello.
Oh, now I do.
Hello.
Yes.
Oh, right on. I would like to take this opportunity real briefly to give my yearly thanks as we approach Thanksgiving to you and Portland Community Media for your bravery and courageousness in producing this program, and to also give thanks to the very brave and courageous producer who has been submitting a program, National Summit to Reassess the U.S.-Israel Special Relationship. I've been catching it every once in a while. It's very difficult to find it on the Comcast
I think
TV
that's coming
schedule.
from Metro East.
And, oh, that's through Metro East?
I think so. I don't think I've seen it here.
Oh, okay. Because I think I've seen it on both Channel 23 and the Metro East channels, and so that might be my confusion there. But
well, it's hard to tell. Yeah.
It is. It's very important for everyone to understand that yes, you can indeed be critical of the Israeli government without being called an anti-Semite. And I want to thank you again, Bill. And I will hang up and let you roll into your next video. And once again, thank you. Thank your crew. Thank PCM TV.
Right on. Thanks. Well, thanks
right,
for
thanks
the kudos there. It's nice to feel wanted. And
Thank you.
Anyway, as far as being in danger or being brave to do this show, no, nobody's threatened me. Nobody's done anything in any way to intimidate me on this show. As a matter of fact, the first year or so, I got an occasional phone call with some negativity, but after that, I think people really started to wake up. I've told the story many times, I've had 2 different incidents with police officers where they point to the bumper sticker on the back of my truck that says 9/11 was an inside job, and they give me the thumbs up, or one of them even said, when you're right, and when the cops know it and acknowledge it, the times are changing. So it's good to look at that. And we can't have enough activism and shows like this. All this stuff is on the internet, but it takes hours to find them. You have to sort through a lot of junk shows that aren't really worth watching, and you find a lot of good stuff that you like watching, and then that takes your time away from looking up other shows. So, even though I'm not really a journalist, I'm not much good at that. I'm not very good at doing any original research of my own, but there's a lot of stuff that's just right out in the open, but no one will talk about it. That's what I'm doing. I'm bringing this stuff up. It's not a secret. It's not a conspiracy theory. If anything, you have to call us amateur historians. It's time to stop calling us tinfoil hat people, We're amateur historians. I say amateur because that gives me an out for not being completely a historian, not really knowing everything about history. I'm just a guy who takes time off on Saturdays to put this stuff on the air. And a lot of people have been very good to help me with the show. As you know, Russia Today has given me blanket permission to show any of their shows anytime I want. Even TED Talks, they didn't endorse my show in any way. They simply said that I could show their show as long as I included the entire credits. And I think they had their fingers crossed that I wouldn't link them with 9/11 somehow. But anyway, we've got 23 minutes left. I'm going to play. This is a 45-minute or 48-minute video. If they've got it set up already, yeah, okay. And Israel attacked the USS Liberty with the intention and the collaboration of the U.S. government. The intention was to blame it on the Egyptians. This is during the 1967, what they called the Six-Day War, I think. And anyway, this was time they wanted to send the USS Liberty to the bottom of the ocean so there'd be no witnesses, nobody to testify what happened, and they were going to blame it on the Egyptians so that America could come into the war and aid Israel in the conquering of the Middle East. But unfortunately for their plan, and as often happens, the plan goes awry, and of course, no matter how many shells they poured into it, and they tore up people in life rafts and everything, but no matter what they did, the boat stayed afloat. Even with LBJ ordering it, I want that boat sunk. And it still came into port, and the story came out, but not for many years. But now it's out officially. So we're going to play part of this documentary, and we'll play the last half of it on the next show. So enjoy, and I'll see you next Saturday.
Jordan and Syria is underway. A spy ship, very lightly armed, but bristling with antennae, steams into the Mediterranean to eavesdrop on the conflict. It is patrolling in international waters off the Egyptian coast. At 2 in the afternoon, on June the 8th, with the war reaching its climax, Israeli jets and motor torpedo boats launch an unprovoked attack on the ship. They drop napalm and strafe its decks with rockets, cannon fire, and armor-piercing rounds before trying to sink it with torpedoes.
We had no way to defend ourselves, and it was we're just slaughtered.
And they shot up the life rafts that were put into the water, and they shot the ones that were still on board the ship.
Bullet holes, shell holes everywhere, blood. The forecastle, the front part of the ship, was just red with blood.
Throughout the attack, the ship flies the Stars and Stripes, the flag of Israel's closest ally, the United States of America. Its name, the USS Liberty, is freshly painted on its stern, and the bow carries the distinctive numbers of an American naval vessel.
Out of a crew of just under 300, there were 34 killed and 172 injured in varying degrees to life-threatening, life-debilitating injuries. So that was more than 2/3 of the crew.
This audio tape, which has never been broadcast before, was recorded in real time by the Israeli military during the assault. The woman's voice in the background is counting down the seconds. It proves that Israeli commanders knew all along that they were attacking an American ship. For the first time, this and other evidence allows us to reveal the true story of what happened that day and what came after, when a deadly assault by one ally on another was covered up and an American president was manipulated by the secret agents of a foreign power, events that have shaped U.S.-Israeli relations ever since. The United States Navy Memorial in Washington, D.C., June the 8th, 2014. Every year, on the anniversary of the attack on the USS Liberty, survivors, relatives, and supporters gather together.
It's a remembrance of those who were killed that day, the 34. I'm Dave Lucas. I was in charge of the deck force. I was 25. My first child was born when I was one day out on that cruise. So as long as they're survivors and maybe children of survivors, I think this will probably be an annual event.
And salute. Forward.
The names of the 34 killed are read out.
Oh. Jack Raper.
Punctuated by the tolling of a Navy bell.
David Marlborough.
And the playing of taps, the traditional military funeral lament.
It's important to not forget what happened and to continue to try to find out why it happened and who made it happen.
In the summer of 1967, America was in turmoil. An incendiary mixture of racial discrimination and extreme poverty exploded into a summer of rioting in cities across the country. But one issue dominated. The Vietnam War. In all, 10,000 troops would die that year. The Americans were trapped. They couldn't leave, and they couldn't win. In the Middle East, too, war looked inevitable. There was growing tension between Israel and its Arab neighbors. Armies were mobilizing. Israel promised the White House they would not attack first, but on the 5th of June, they jammed radar sets at the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv, so the Americans couldn't detect their jets taking off to launch a surprise assault on Egypt. Meanwhile, the USS Liberty was sailing across the Mediterranean into the war zone.
Liberty was a state-of-the-art intelligence-gathering vessel of the time, and what we did is we listened. We were a listening ship. My name is Lloyd Painter. I was a research officer. We could receive any signal that was out there, low band, high band, anything, intercepting it, recording it. And we did have on board some translators who could have immediate translation of what was going on. We would actually bounce signals off the moon back to NSA.
We're spies. I'm Jim Cavanaugh. I was a communication technician aboard the USS Liberty, and I intercepted Morse code. We're spies. I mean, we're intercepting messages from embassies, military bases, police, anything and everything that we could get to ensure that the United States was comfortable with what was going on in the world and no one's conspiring against us. And basically, it was to protect our interests.
This was the Cold War. American President Lyndon Johnson knew that the Russians already had substantial military influence in Egypt. He needed to find out what they were going to do next, to make sure that a local conflict did not become a world war, with the USA backing Israel and Russia siding with the Arab cause.
I was assigned as a Russian linguist aboard the ship. I'm Bryce Lockwood, United States Marine Corps, retired. The Israelis. Our primary purpose was to intercept communications of the Russian spy aircraft as it were at Alexandria, Egypt, and that was our job, was to find them. We were not targeted against the Israelis.
Life was very relaxing. One of the nice things about the Liberty is we had air conditioning because we had communications equipment, so we were cool in the hot days. It was a very laid-back, very clean ship. It was spotless. The morale was pretty high, I mean very high.
By the time the Liberty arrived off the coast of Egypt on the 8th of June, the war had just 2 days left to run. Israel had seized the old city of Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. Jordanian forces were beaten, and Egypt was conceding defeat. Only Syria held out.
The airwaves were dead. The only voices we did get were those of Israeli or Hebrew was what we were hearing. My name is Bob Wilson. I worked for NSA on June the 8th, 1967, when what we were trying to monitor, find something coming from the direction of Egypt. There just was nothing. They owned the skies and the ground and everything. I don't think there was anything moving at that time that they didn't know about.
I was listening to the chatter the night before. They knew it was an American ship that came into the area. They knew who we were.
5:15 a.m., first light. The ship's log recorded an Israeli photo reconnaissance plane flying over the Liberty.
It was easily identifiable as a NOR-Atlas aircraft, and those are photo reconnaissance aircraft.
Israeli records obtained by Al Jazeera show that their reconnaissance plane reported the Liberty as an American spy ship, hull number GTR-5.
Well, I was on the bridge. I'm John Scott. I was the damage control officer. And it circled the ship kind of in a broad circle and headed back towards Israel.
Israeli planes then continued to fly over the Liberty all morning.
And they would do half-moon passes over us, and we saw that they were Israeli.
They were slowly lumbering over our ship, and we were waving at them, they were waving at us.
They were sophisticated, almost as sophisticated as we were as far as surveillance and technology. They had everything. We supplied them with all the technology to this day.
And I felt that we were in great shape because they knew who we were.
They're our friends. We felt safe. Actually, it was a secure feeling to see them.
There was one other thing which made the crew feel safe.
We had an American flag flying the standard, and then we put up the holiday colors, which is a huge American flag. And it was a bright sunny day with the wind blowing, I don't know, 5 or 10 knots, the flag was unfurled. You could see it for miles.
Meanwhile, Israeli military jets were on their way. On the real-time audio tape, obtained by Al Jazeera, at 1:53 p.m., the pilots asked their base control about the ship. The USS Liberty was the only ship of any size in the area. The American Sixth Fleet, including 2 aircraft carriers, was 500 miles away.
Oh, it was a great day. Hello, I'm Jim Smith. I was a damage controlman in engineering. I mean, I'm 20 years old at the time. I come from a small town, used to throw hay bales in the summertime for $1 an hour. Sun was shining, blue sky, clouds, nice, people sunbathing on the deck. We had lunch, and 5 minutes later, maybe, here came the jets, and nobody really knew what was happening until they started firing at us.
The captain said to me, alert the forward gun mounts, we're under attack. And I tried to raise the 2 sailors in the forward gun mounts. I looked out, and they were blown to pieces by the rocket.
When the attack started, and we realized that we needed help, we tried to communicate with the Sixth Fleet.
They were jamming both our distress frequencies and our tactical frequencies. The tactical frequencies is all right, but the international distress frequencies is a violation of international law to jam them, and the Israelis were jamming them.
And we could not get a signal across. Here's the question I have to ask. Who would know the frequencies other than an ally? And who was the ally in the war? It wasn't Egypt. It was Israel. They would know, and only they would know in this conflict, what our frequencies would be.
Cut off from the outside world, the crew on the Liberty was defenseless.
We had 450 caliber machine guns on board that were basically there to repel any boarders that might come by, you know, a pirate situation. Certainly weren't designed to bring down jet aircraft that were hammering at us.
But you can't shoot a jet going 600 miles an hour with a 50 caliber machine gun. It doesn't work.
It was just a surreal scene. People who had been standing there earlier joking and laughing were now dead, dying, and with the walking dead and wounded. It was just unreal.
Gasoline barrels stored on the deck of the ship burst into flames. The crew rushed to try to put out the fires.
I was watching the aircraft as they circled around, and when they got to coming back towards the ship, I just holler at him, down. They'd fire and circle back around. We'd jump back up and keep fighting the fire. The rocket noise is horrendous. When a rocket explodes, you can't escape a rocket. I don't care where you go.
What the crew didn't know was that at 2:03, the Israeli pilots were ordered to use a new, much deadlier weapon.
The biggest problem, I guess, from that was the napalm, which they dropped from the airplane.
The napalm had burned, scorched almost the entire front part of the ship, the bridge area.
The whole top side of the ship had been set on fire, and it was all charred. It was no longer navy gray.
You have to stop the fires, to stop the flooding, to keep that ship afloat. That's your home. You got nowhere else to go. You can't pack up and go down the road, because there is no down the road.
Up above, the Israeli military argued about what should happen next and who should sink the Liberty.
I remember thinking, I was in pretty good shape then. I said, I think I could swim it to the shore. And then I thought sharks. And I thought a lot of things, all quickly, you know?
At 2:11, with the Israeli jets running out of ammunition, the pilots were instructed to fly down and confirm the identity of the ship. It was now 2:12, and the Israeli control tower knew for certain this was an American ship, the same one its forces had first identified at 5:15 a.m. that morning, and then buzzed again during 7 additional reconnaissance flights throughout the day. The jets then pulled out, but 3 Israeli Navy motor torpedo boats were already on their way. The USS Liberty was a spy ship. In the event of an attack, it was standard procedure for the spies on board to destroy everything, just in case it fell into enemy hands.
Everyone was destroying material. Everyone was stripping information off of computers, ripping computers open, pulling information out.
That's something you just don't want to hear aboard ship. You've done all this work, collected this intelligence and processed it, and now you have to destroy it.
You just didn't want the enemy to get a hold of anything classified.
At 2:35, the Israeli motorboats fired 5 torpedoes. 4 missed, but 1 hit. It had been over 9 hours since the Israeli military first identified the Liberty. Israeli planes had flown over it repeatedly, and 20 minutes earlier, their control tower had confirmed it yet again as an American ship. 25 Americans were about to die in a single moment. This is what it looks like when a torpedo hits a ship the size of the Liberty.
The torpedo threw us up in the air like a roller coaster. It felt like one coming down. Dead silence, lights all off, smoke and haze everywhere.
I went back to the drinking fountain and filled it with blood. Reached down to get a drink, and a black man stared back at me.
And when it fell back to get right, it just kept getting wrong. Kept sinking and sinking and sinking.
We just waited, all of us waited, thinking that this was it. We're going down.
And I figured that was the end of life for me.
The torpedo had blown a huge hole in the hull, 39 feet by 24, killing 25 Americans in a single hit.
The torpedo hit the room that I was in, and it was just luck. This guy died, this one lived, that guy died. It was how much shrapnel was coming in your direction. You know, the old-fashioned typewriters, I had the letter H sticking out of my left foot. I had, I don't know, 80 pieces of shrapnel in my lower extremities, and the place filled up with water that fast. Totally black, totally filled with powder and oil. It was like you were gagging, and you only had about 8 or 10 inches of space where you could catch a breath. The only way I could go in that direction was to drop down and swim underwater 4 or 5 strokes, come back up, and then frantically catch a breath and try to find something else to hold on to. And I got pulled through the hatch and onto the deck.
Others were not so lucky.
My friend Ronnie Campbell had a desk right there. And I remember Ronnie saying, "You fellas can do what you want to, so I'm going to write a letter home." And he stuck a piece of paper in his his typewriter, and began typing, "Dear Eileen, you won't believe what's happening to us." And just seconds after that, the torpedo struck and killed both the 2 Marines, killed my friend Ronnie Campbell.
And my job was to try to get probably 20 or 30 wounded sailors out to the main deck and to the life rafts. So I went up and looked out myself before I tried to get anyone up. And that's when I observed a motor torpedo boat, Israeli, plainly marked with the Star of David, machine gunning our life rafts.
The crew of the Liberty were now trapped on board their own ship with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide.
The torpedo boats came in closer and began to machine gun the ship using armor-piercing projectiles.
The armor-piercing, the shells that they were using were leaving holes about that big around in the metal plating. Just peeled it out like it was orange peel.
At close range, the armor-piercing rounds ripped through the steel hull of the ship. Nowhere was safe.
This bullet was retrieved from one of the navigational books at the rear portion of the bridge. It had penetrated the skin of the ship, gone through at least one other book, and then stopped in the second book. This is part of an armor-piercing shell. The outer portion or jacket makes the hole that this then goes through. And a bullet like this that hit Seaman Francis Brown and killed him.
He died right on the spot, just fell to the floor dead. He was just barely 18.
There weren't enough helmets to go around for everyone.
It was like sitting in a cardboard box and having somebody shoot through it. The bullets were just coming everywhere.